Welcome to Corporate Law Lab. I'm Neil Taylor, host of the podcast and director of the Corporate Law Center at the University of Cincinnati. Most of our episodes till now have focused on general counsel or other senior corporate in-house leaders. We will continue to do those episodes as we move forward, but for the next few episodes, we're going to talk to various law firm leaders about the business of law, specifically about firm culture, what it is, how it can be maintained, the dark art of managing lawyers and law firms, and to get their views on AI and its possible impact on young lawyers. When we decided to do a series like this, I wanted to start with Jody Brant at Katz Teller. Katz Teller is a prestigious Cincinnati firm of about 30 lawyers that seems practically unchanged since when I first encountered it 35 years ago as a law student. So I wanted to talk to Jody about how that firm has maintained its way and continued to deliver services, how that's changed over the years, and a lot of other things. We really enjoyed the conversation. I was joined by our great LLM student, Federica Salagari, who has just recently graduated. We hope you enjoy this episode and the ones to come. Thank you. Okay, we're joined today by Jody Brant from Katz Teller, Brant and Field, and we also have with us Federica Salagari. Federica is just about to have her LLM in a couple of weeks. Jody, you went to Dartmouth undergrad, majoring in
Math.
And then what'd you do between undergrad and going to law school?
So I'd grown up around the law. I had always expected to go to law school. In my senior year at Dartmouth, there were a number of admissions directors for law schools that were traveling around the country together, giving presentations to seniors in college. And remember, a gentleman from the University of Chicago opened up and said, chances are if you take the LSAT, you're going to apply to law school. And if you apply to law school, chances are you'll get in somewhere. You'll graduate in 3 years and you'll practice law for the next 30 years. And he said, if you're not sure that's what you want to do, you ought to get off the train now. Law school will always be here. And that was kind of all the push I needed. I had assumed I was going to go to law school right away. But I had spent a lot of time in college doing some tutoring, doing some coaching, taking a few education classes. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to give teaching a chance. And so I ended up applying for teaching jobs and became a middle school and high school math teacher at a small private school in Washington, D.C.
Did you like it?
I loved it. It felt like I was doing something useful and worthwhile kind of immediately out of school, not some entry-level job, not just continuing education. And so it was a lot of fun.
So what was the most rewarding part of it?
There were a lot of aspects. I mean, I liked working with people every day. It felt like you were doing something useful. It was a little bit scary because there was a real responsibility when you walked in the classroom. You had information you were supposed to get across to a group of people. And if you didn't get it across, like, you're going to be able to move on and further their education. And so every day was a little bit different, and it was just a lot of fun. And got an opportunity to do some coaching there as well, and just really enjoyed it.
So you're from a family of lawyers.
Yes.
At least several that I know of.
Yes.
And it was your father that was the original Brant in Katz Teller, Brant and Hild, right?
Yeah, he was one of the founding partners.
Why did you then decide to go to law school? Was it just like, now it's time that I've done this, or was it?
So there were a couple of things. I had expected to teach for 2 years, got through the first year, and felt like I had no idea what I was doing. And if I was going to do something different after the second year, I needed to spend some time during that year applying to other things, figuring out what that was. And I felt like pretty quickly I realized I needed to give teaching 3 years because I needed to have a year where I wasn't focused on what's next. And got to the third year and debated staying in education and maybe getting a master's in education. I got a little nervous about whether 10 years out I could still relate to the kids, because I felt like I was teaching kids that were only 5 years younger than me when I started. I had cousins that were 10 years younger than me, so it just felt very natural. Um, that was probably a misplaced fear, having had kids now and been able to interact with them. But so that was kind of why I pushed off, decided education wasn't where I was going to stay. And then I thought about doing something further in mathematics, maybe pursuing a PhD, maybe working in a think tank or being a professor. And the thing that scared me about that there were two aspects. One, it felt like if you're solving some big problems, you're going to be sitting in an office, thinking through, going through data, doing that kind of stuff, and there's going to be less personal interaction. And I really enjoyed the personal interaction. There would be problem solving, which I really enjoyed, but it's not the personal interaction. And then the second thing is, if I were going to be a professor, I would have to move wherever the job was. Like, there aren't unlimited numbers of jobs. One of the guys I taught with was a philosophy major, and he was kind of considering the same thing. And he talked to his philosophy professor, his favorite professor from college, who told him that when the professor finished his PhD and went on the market, there were 125 other people had finished their PhD that year, and there were 3 jobs in academia. And so law felt like a career where I could interact with people on a regular basis, where I could be problem solving, and where I would have the opportunity to live where I wanted to live. So,
how much did it help you having been out working for a few years when you went to law school? Was that a big help? Did it make no difference?
For me, it felt like it was a big help. Couple things. I decided, I was living in DC. I applied to a number of law schools around the country, including UC. Had opportunities to go to a couple different places, but decided to go to Georgetown.
Didn't get into UC, huh?
I did make it into UC, and considered it, but wasn't sure at that point that I was going to move back to Cincinnati, and so felt like Georgetown had a little more national appeal at that point. Maybe not anymore.
I'm sure it still does.
And I had met my wife while I was living in DC. We were dating. We'd been dating a couple years, and it felt like if I stayed in DC, we didn't have to have a big conversation. Are we staying together? Are you moving with me? And I had a support network just of friends outside of law school as well. And so it felt like a good decision, just stay in DC. And then I approached law school a lot like a job. I showed up at 8 in the morning. It didn't matter what time class was. I did work while I was there, went to my classes, did my homework. And usually when I left at 3 or 4 or 5 in the afternoon, most stuff was done. And so having the experience of being out and working and getting to a work day was helpful. And you could, I mean, Georgetown's a big law school. You could tell students that went straight through from undergrad and the people that had more working experience. And I was probably right in the middle of the class, having been out 3 years in terms of that.
Yeah, I was similar for me. I was out for a couple of years. I didn't do anything as useful as teach school. I sold windows and doors in Mont Hill. But for the Cincinnatians, that's a local reference.
Yeah.
But just treating it like a job, just showing up at 8. I mean, the amount of work was tremendously more than it was as a poli-sci major in undergrad. As a math major, you probably had to do a bit more work in undergrad, but it's still a step up.
Problem sets, yeah.
So let's switch then to, I guess, coming back home and joining your father's firm. I assume, I teased you about going to Georgetown over UC, but I assume that wasn't your only option.
Yeah, and by the end of law school, I was married. So there was another person to consider me. But I spent the summer between my second and third year, I split time with a big firm in DC and at Katz Teller. And it became clear by the end of that experience that what Katz Teller offered. And a couple examples. When I was at the big firm, they told me they had agreed to let me split, it was fairly uncommon, but it happened occasionally. And they said, you're going to be here 7 weeks. We really want all of our summer associates to do 4 projects over the course of the summer. And we'd like you to do that even though you only have 7 weeks so we can evaluate you. I said, okay, I'll do my best. You'd go to the library and pull out a memo with a project on it from a book, and then you'd go spend a week working on that project, doing research, writing up a memo, turning it into somebody. Maybe they mark it up and ask you to do a little more, and then you go get your next project. I was able to get that done. I showed up at Katz Teller, and I met with Mark Jenkin on the first day, and he said, hey, we'd really like you to do a project while you're here with every lawyer firm. Of 22 lawyers at the time. And I was like, oh my God, I had to do four projects over 7 weeks, and you want me to do 22 projects. But then I got the first project, and somebody asked me to look up, answer a question for a client on a sales tax issue, and then call the client and give them the answer. So it was like an hour of getting familiar with the statute, pulling stuff together, and then a half an hour phone call. Oh, okay. This is a different way to practice. It felt much less academic and more practical, and felt like that's what I wanted to do. And then the second example, when I got offers from both those places, and I was considering going to do a master's in tax law. A number of our lawyers have done that. A number of my family members have done that, and that's a year program in LLM after law school. And I told the big firm in DC that that's what I was interested in. And they said, well, we might have a spot for you when you come back. We don't really need you to go do that. And it kind of became clear to me that they need me to bill hours. And I will get a great education around tax law if I did tax law reputation. But for me to go out and get a broader skill set, it might help me down the road. They didn't care. They might be willing to take me after I had it, but they weren't going to guarantee that. And when I asked Katz Teller about that, that'd be great. You'll come in as a first-year associate, but you'll be able to help us structure deals and doing things like that.
So talk a little bit about the culture of the firm and who the founders were, how long it's been around.
Yeah. So we're approaching 50 years. So 1980, early in the 80s was when we started. My dad and his good friend growing up, Guy Hild, had started a firm called Brant & Hild when they got out of law school in the 60s. And it had maybe 10 lawyers at the time. But they were good friends with Jerry Teller, who was at a smaller firm, and then Katz, been at a big firm but had gone out on his own. And they would have breakfast on Saturday mornings. They would just talk about different practice issues, different things that were going on with clients. They would help each other with solving problems. And I think Reuven was the impetus of putting together a firm. Another family member of mine had a big role in that. My uncle, Bob Brant, who is 12 and a half years younger than my dad, had gone to NYU right as ERISA was coming out. And both Reuven and my dad had a lot of retirement plans that they had designed that all needed to be amended because of ERISA. And there wasn't anybody in the country who knew any more about ERISA than Bobby did, because he was coming straight out of school as it had been passed. And so Reuven, I think, had tried to hire Bobby out of NYU, and my dad wouldn't let him. And eventually, I think Reuven saw the benefit of putting a firm together. He had practiced at a big firm and had left there. The story he told was that there was a point in time when typewriters were being replaced by word processors, and the first kind of set up word processor were coming out, which could have memory. And so if you messed up on a page, you didn't have to throw that page out and start over again. This was brilliant. The firm needed to invest in that, but he couldn't convince enough of his partners that that was the right thing to do because they didn't want to spend the money. And he thought that if he didn't want to be in a situation where he thought there was something that was the right thing to do that he couldn't get done because he couldn't get his partners to agree. And so he went out on his own and eventually saw the benefits again of being in a firm, but he had always said the firm will never be bigger than the number of attorneys that could fit around one table. So, and that was kind of how
the Saturday morning breakfast. I mean, and I had a very brief, I too split my summer. I spent half of my summer at Katz Teller, half of it at Lewis and Roca in Phoenix. I wanted to get out of Cincinnati. You wanted to come back to Cincinnati. So that's a big difference. But I, to this day, have never seen anything quite like democracy is maybe the wrong word because nobody asked me for a vote, but they certainly asked for my opinion. When I was, just a kid sitting there on Saturday morning, watching the partners hash something out that I couldn't believe they were talking about in front of me. I mean, it wasn't anything, it was an HR issue or something, but it was like, oh my God, they're talking about it in front of me.
Yeah, I think we tend to be pretty transparent with all of our attorneys, associates, and shareholders. We share a lot of financial information, and we talk a lot about that stuff. For a long time, there was a big group of lawyers that would come in on Saturday mornings and we'd order La Rosas and we'd have lunch on and work. And there's still a few people that come in on Saturdays. They may sit and eat lunch together, but it's not the same as it was, which is understandable, right? It used to be you had to be in the office to get most of your work done. And now if you can do almost all of it seamlessly from home. And so why take the half an hour or 45 minutes each way to get in and out on the weekends? But that was a feature of our culture back then, being in on Saturdays.
Yeah, I was a starving law student. I was like, free food. All I got to do is come to work on a Saturday. Sure.
Exactly. And again, you heard this conversation in COVID when a lot of people were working from home, but there's a whole lot of learning that goes on when you're just sitting around having a conversation that you can't get when you're working at home. And so that's a feature we need to figure out.
So I'm going to let you jump in a second.
Yes.
How has you talked about how technology and the ability to work remotely has changed. Well, has it changed the culture in your view? Or have you managed to keep the culture that the firm started with despite the changes around you?
I mean, I think if you talk to people from different eras of the firm and people who knew the firm in Cincinnati, I think the reputation was we had a bunch of people that worked really hard in terms of just billing hours. That was the priority, get the work done. We always were blessed with having a lot of work to do. And there weren't a bunch of lawyers that says, my job's to bring in the work and you guys go do it. Everybody was at the table. Everybody was working hard. And that aspect, I think people still work hard, but it's in different ways today. And if you look at billable hours, they're different. And they're different for a lot of reasons. Technology has a lot to do with it. If you said, if somebody's got to work on an asset purchase agreement, that might be 2 or 3 or 4 days of work to pull together the first draft of that to then circulate and do. And now first drafts can be generated in a matter of hours. And with AI, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit, it can be generated in a matter of minutes or seconds now. So it's just a different environment.
Well, before I pass over to you, let's just go there now. Do you worry that AI, is it something for you to celebrate or worry about, or both, the onset of AI and the fact that you could have something that looks like an asset purchase agreement ready in 10 minutes?
Yeah, it will. I'm starting to develop a deeper understanding. I would say a moderate to slow adopter of technology personally. Maybe right in the middle at the firm. But I've got a number of early adopters who are experimenting with AI right now, and we've been over the last 2 or 3 months really starting a conversation. And the, there are a number of aspects that are really unbelievable, right? I think when you look at what Harvey can do in terms of generating a first draft of a document, I've got a litigator who had a project, had to put together a set of interrogatories that he estimated would probably take 10 hours of his time. He loaded the documents, the complaint and the background documents into Harvey, asked it to generate the interrogatories in, under a minute. He got a set of interrogatories. He then had to spend about an hour, 2 hours going through those. They were they were a really good start, probably as good or better than what you would expect from an associate to pull those together. And it took him an hour and a half to pull together a final product. It still needed a bunch of his input. Can't rely on it without spending some time on it, but it took a 10-hour project down to an hour and a half, which is amazing in terms of the time saving, but scary in terms of what does that mean for the legal profession.
I would guess your entire career, and it's because it's been true a bit for mine, that people have been talking about the near-term death of the billable hour.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of reasons that didn't happen. I've experimented with value billing. I've experimented with, billing on a project basis, on a stop now.
Yeah.
There's a cap, please stop, or keep working, but don't charge me anymore. And I always found that never seemed to work because people were always keeping score the other way.
Yeah.
So if you were in-house talking to someone like you and said, okay, we want to do a flat fee deal, you knew whether that was working for you or not. And I think that's part of why it's never really caught on. But do you think AI will change that? You can react to any part of that.
Yeah, I think so. I mean,
wasn't.
I agree with you. I think it's a challenge. Anytime we try to analyze a different billing arrangement, it is always evaluated on the billable hour. And so we've had every year it comes up in 2 or 3 or 4 different settings. And again, a bunch of people in our office, when we talk about it, will always translate it to, oh, we can't do that because then we're getting a lower billable rate. And we've got to be able to adapt. And we found some situations where we can do it, but it's really just one-off, right? We're not creating something that is scalable, I think. But AI is going to force some of that. Couple of my colleagues just got back from a conference. We're part of a affiliation of firms worldwide that are all independent law firms, but they have a conference. They have a couple different conferences a year, but this one, AI was the major focus of it. And when I was talking to them when they came back, they said some of the big corporate clients now are telling their law firms that, hey, when you put together this deal, your first draft has to be AI generated. We're not paying for you to put 4 associates on this and put together an agreement over, 10 hours for each of them. We want you to do a draft that way. And so then the whole staffing model changes, and it does raise questions for your students coming out of law school. Okay, what can a first year associate do? How are they going to learn if they're not pulling together all pieces of a contract? And how do they, but clients may not be willing. In the past, clients have been willing to pay, and I think have paid for firms to train their associates in a sense. And that may not happen anymore. I think the leveraged model may get pushed a little bit in terms of the number of associates you need to build things up. And so
I think a lot of lawyers have kind of looked at that saying, well, if the client doesn't want to pay for me to develop my first and second year associates, I can live with that. I'll bill them at a reduced rate. I'll do whatever. I'll write off time if it doesn't look like, it was as efficient as it should have been. But I know that I've got this person who will get to know this client and will have a 25-year relationship with that client if all works well. in a situation where people then leave after 2 or 3 years, that's not going to work for the law firms anymore. If you're expected to carry the student coming out of law school, and then as soon as you've trained them up, off they go to the next adventure, probably with that in-house client that didn't want to pay for them. I don't think I've asked the question, but
Yeah.
what do you think? How do you think about that? I mean, is this why you're so focused on retention?
It's such a cost for us to develop people that we're just not set up to bring in 10 people in a class and know that 8 of them are going to make partner and the 2 of them might. We want to hire 1 or 2 people out of law school, maybe not every year. And we want them to be with us forever if that's possible. And I think when I came out of law school, I feel like that was a scary thing to say to somebody, right? A little like the admissions person who said to me, you're going to graduate in 3 years and practice law for the next 30. It feels really permanent. And when we were interviewing associates and saying, hey, we hope you're going to be here, become a partner, and practice your whole career here, that's a scary thing when they're looking for their first job out of law school. I think it may be less scary today with stability than it used to be. I think and we've been pretty fortunate that most of the people we have been with us for a long time.
Yeah, in fact, your firm seems to have a very low turnover. And could please talk to us about what are the cultural elements of your firm that actually allow for that remarkably low turnover?
I think one of them is we let people get involved with clients service directly pretty early. So I think that is a plus. It was for me, the idea that I could do a research project as a summer associate, and then they want me to pick up the phone and talk to the client. That there isn't somebody there saying, no, I want to be the only person this client knows, so that everything they need comes through me. They wanted the client to get the answer and get it efficiently, and I think that comes across. I think it comes across pretty quickly that we don't view the associates as just hour machines, right? That we don't even have a billable hour minimum for our associates. We don't think that makes a ton of sense for the client. It's our job to put work on their plate, and if the work gets done and it's getting done well, then why should they spend another hour reviewing that memo they just finished or that contract when it's ready to go off to the client and get reviewed for comments? So we try to be practical. We try to be pretty open about the information we share, and I think that communicates that we care about the associates. So
for sure. And do you think that the firm's approach to the work-life balance, especially on a longer term, are affecting the low turnover that we were talking about?
I think that's probably some of it. I think we're pretty flexible. So we've got a few people in the last couple of years that have intentionally gone to work in 70% schedules because of young families, and we've been pretty flexible in terms of working out those arrangements. I think a lot of firms are able to do that now. I think we do have a wide disparity. If you sat down and looked at our billable hours across the board, we have a pretty wide disparity in terms of what people do, and I think that's a function of both lifestyle and practice area too, right? There's certain practice areas that it's hard to, when you're busy, it's hard to manage the work-life balance because things have to get done on a time frame. So,
but we won't keep calling you a small firm because you're at least medium size. As a medium sized firm, I assume you don't have to do lockstep compensation.
Correct. We're very flexible in our compensation model. I took a class my third year at Georgetown that was about the practice of law, right? Trying to be pretty practical. But my takeaway from that class is if you want to understand the culture at a firm, understand their compensation system. And that's how you will understand the culture at the firm. And ours is, in my mind, unique. I've heard it described like democracy, in that it's a terrible form of government. We haven't found one that's any better yet. So our system is a very participatory system. So the shareholders are essentially given a bunch of data and a pool that we project for our compensation for the year, and they have the opportunity to allocate that among the shareholders for the current year. And then there's a compensation committee that sees all those recommendations and has to make sense of them, and then kind of spits out the recommendations that get adopted by the firm. And so it's not formulaic. There's no origination doesn't enter into the computation the same way it does at a lot of firms. And I think we have conversations about that every couple of years. Should we be doing it differently? I think there are a lot of people from the start, a lot of our more senior partners feel like that is a huge positive, that we don't sit around and have fights about, hey, did Neil bring in this client or did I? Well, I knew that guy from grade school and you knew him a little more recently. And the answer is, well, maybe he came in because of both of us and he feels comfortable, and we don't have to fight. Is it 40-60 share origination? It's just a firm client, and we don't have to have that fight. And it's good for the firm if that client knows multiple people. So I don't, if I've got responsibility for a client, it's actually going to be frowned upon if I make every one of their legal problems come through me. And if they got a real estate problem and I refer it to someone else, but I make that person give me the answer so that I can be the one to call him back. Number one, it's inefficient for the client because he's got to have a call with me. I got to have a conversation with someone else who then has to tell me the answer, versus if he just calls that person, might be able to get the answer in one phone call. And it's just much more efficient. And now he's got two ties to the firm and more likely to stick around long. So I feel like, Mark Janke often describes it. We've tried to build a law firm the way clients would want a law firm built. And I think that's been positive for us.
Because the fights over origination, I would guess, go on. Since you don't do it, you would know. But I mean, I know of an experience where an associate brought a piece of work into a firm, and at compensation time, the managing partner came to the associate and said, "Who brought this in? Because 4 different people have claimed it." Well, the associate brought it in, and everyone knew it was a free-for-all, but at compensation time.
Yeah.
And that kind of stuff just doesn't happen in your model, but it also requires a level of commitment to each other as partners.
Yeah, and as we get a little bigger, it's a little harder, and we were 14 partners. Everybody knew what everyone else was doing pretty well. And we knew, look, if Neil brought in a client, we knew that was kind of Neil's relationship, and we can give him some credit in the system for that, but it isn't formulaic, and it isn't, and so it doesn't then cause people to behave bad way, right? People still behave in bad way, right? It's never perfect, and we're never gonna put out recommendations that every shareholder is gonna look at and say, yeah, that seems completely fair to me. I don't think I should get more than that person or that, right? It's just, it is what it is whenever you're dividing up a pie like that. But we've done a pretty good job of not having too many of those kind of fights and undermining our culture.
Yeah. So this collaborativeness that you're talking about, was it one of the reasons that you decided to remain at Katz Teller when you switched?
Yeah. So I moved back to Cincinnati. I probably wouldn't have moved back to Cincinnati, but to work at Katz Teller, and it would be, hard for me to leave at all. Right. And I'm now getting close to the point where I have practiced for 30 years, right? Which is a little scary to think about. But yeah, I
Turns out you don't have to quit at 30.
Yeah, no, it's right. But it feels, again, I've only worked at one firm other than my summer at a big firm in DC, and it feels more collaborative than what I expected, what I've heard at other places, which again is good, right? When we've got our corporate guys working on a transaction and there's an opportunity to do some estate planning out of the transaction, or there's an opportunity to structure things in a way to get a more efficient tax result, really easy for them to go to people in the tax group and have them help with that. And same thing on the other side, when you've got an estate planning client who's got a real estate issue or a corporate issue, very easy for us to work with the corporate team.
Could you mention other positive elements that kind of featured your experience at Katz Teller?
I think, and again, my guess is this happens fairly well also at other firms, but everybody's willing to help you solve whatever problem you're working on. So I can walk down the hall and say, hey, have you ever seen this before? I've got a client who needs help in this area. What are your thoughts on how to handle it? And it's pretty easy. And most people stop and take the time. And if they don't have the time that day, they'll say, hey, can I talk to you tomorrow on that? And they're very generous in that kind of work. It takes, being smaller, we don't have as formal a mentoring process or things like that. So you've got to be actively involved in your own development, right? You can't just sit back passively and just kind of wait to take it all in. If you got a problem, you ought to go seek out someone to help you solve it now, right?
And that's even a consequence of the collaborativeness aspect that we talked about before. Because if you want to get the collaborative results, then you need even to engage actively in whatever the problems that arise may be.
I just wanted to break in there. A lot of full service large law firms have taken certain areas of the practice and said, we're not going to do that. It doesn't fit within our model. Given that, at least for sure, I know Jerry Teller and Guy Hild both started as family lawyers, or stayed as family lawyers.
Yeah.
Pretty much their whole careers. I guess Ruben did as well, a bit more.
I don't think Ruben did more estate planning than force-related work.
So how has that affected, though, how the firm thinks of what is full service to a client? Are there things that you say, no, we're not ever going to do that?
Yeah, and I think there are a couple things. We probably have the biggest tax group when you count estate planning and kind of general tax, retirement plan design of, I think, almost any firm in Cincinnati, even though we've only got 30 lawyers. And I think that is, having that core competency has been really valuable to a set of our clients, just entrepreneurial clients who have estate planning needs and have tax structuring needs and those kinds of things. And those are, we have a young estate planner in our group who didn't start out doing estate planning at a big firm when she was in Cleveland. She wanted to. She always wanted to, but she went to a big firm in Cleveland that made the decision, we're not going to do any estate planning. And their rationale was, we do estate planning, we're going to end up representing big corporate executives. And what if their corporations want to come and do work with us and hire us for big projects and significant revenue? And we've done a $5,000 or $10,000 estate plan for their CEO, and now we might be conflicted out of doing that work. They don't want to have that happen. And so I think some big firms have avoided the domestic relations area and have avoided the estate planning area. But for us, that's been a great way to meet entrepreneurial clients, and it's great. We don't do a lot of big public company work. We tend to work with individuals and with smaller, kind of closely held businesses, and that's been great. And then our practice has grown around their needs. And if we feel like we have the competence to do it, we'll do it. If we don't, then we'll prefer out. So I think it's worked to our advantage to be in some areas that bigger firms tend to avoid.
Yeah. For sure. And going back a bit to like your decision to join the firm and your experience to join Katz Teller, what were some, if any, of the early challenges that you faced as a first year associate, or yeah, besides your Washington experience?
So it's hard to remember that far back, but it's just it is, again, getting to the point where you're comfortable asking questions and not just kind of sitting at your desk trying to figure out an answer. Like, you've got resources there. You can be more active in taking responsibility for getting the answers. And it's true with clients as well. The number of times where a client comes and tells you they want to do X, and you have to back them up and say, wait, let's go back. Tell me why you want to do X. Like, what is the goal? What are we trying to achieve? Because you might be able to get to that result doing X, Y, or Z, and Z may be 10 times better than X, but the client already thought they had an answer to what their problem is. And so it's just slowing things down sometimes to make sure you understand what needs to happen. And you got to be confident enough to ask enough questions. And that's true in kind of just practice of law, but true in any issue you deal with at the firm, and true in any leadership role. Like,
We had a question in the outline that was, did you have experience managing teams before you took on your current role as managing partner? But I'd actually like to take a step back from that. How do you view managing in this context? Do you think it's similar or different to other firms, other businesses?
so we're a very flat organization. I can't imagine a flatter organization in some ways. And early on, we used to do things by consensus. And so any material issue got brought before everybody, and we've had these wide-ranging debates. And we often, if somebody, even if it was just one person, was loud enough in their opposition, and loud doesn't, not always yelling, but we deferred, right? I mean, one example, which seems kind of silly at this point, but for a long time, when I started, there was a debate about being casual on Fridays. So this is 1998. The world was, everybody was still suit and tie most of the time, but a lot had started to change by 98. And Reuven Katz was incredibly professional, was just a tremendous leader for the firm, a tremendous lawyer. But he said, look, if we go to casual Fridays in the office, I'm not bringing clients to the office on Friday. And that put an end to the debate. Nobody wanted to put him in an uncomfortable situation. And he felt strongly about it. And that debate continued for a few years, to the point where eventually some of the younger guys were sitting in meetings with their clients. Their clients are sitting in very casual attire, and they're looking over at the attorney wearing a suit and viewing him negatively. Like, do you think you're more important than we are? Like, why are you? And eventually we were just forced to adjust. And Reuven acknowledged that. And it was, but it was a long debate. And in a more hierarchical organization, it would have just been decided at the top, and everybody would have followed it, and that would have been fine. But
yeah, I remember in the mid-90s, just to see how that, I asked the client, do you want me to come to your office or do you want to come down here? Either way, but I'm sure you don't want me, pay me for driving out to your office. And he's like, well, if I come to your office, I feel like I have to put a suit on, so you come here.
Yeah. There was a little bit of that. Yeah. So again, that was kind of a trivial way, but we still struggle at times in our decision-making process, because we've got a lot of people who have been with us a long time and have been part of making decisions, and they're at a firm like ours because they want to be part of the conversation. So figuring out a balance of how do you tee up issues, how do you let people give input, but then how does a decision get made efficiently so it doesn't take too much time? Because obviously our time is what we sell, right? and that's hard. And I think it'll continue to be a challenge back and forth.
So how did this happen to you that you became managing partner? I assume it's not something that you were like, oh gosh, someday I hope I'm managing partner.
When you get involved in enough stuff, and I'm the third in 40 plus years, right? I'm the third managing partner. Reuven Katz did this for close to 20 years. Mark Janke did it for 20 years, and I'm in by 5 years now. And so it's not a job that is necessarily highly coveted. It's not. At some firms, it's compensated in a real way. For us, it's somebody's got to do it, and I think we've each viewed the role a little bit differently. I think Mark were here, he would say his role as managing partner was to be the best example of what a Katz Teller lawyer should be, to be so that people could follow that and know what it meant to be that, and to deal with kind of crises as they come up in kind of a reactive way, and some other planning and strategy stuff. But I think that's it. And I think the world has changed enough. The generations, there's generations view the world and the practice of law differently, that I've got to be a little more flexible. I've got to be able to understand what each of our lawyers needs to be successful, and then help provide it. And I think my disposition is good to do that, and maybe I'm doing a good job at it, maybe not. If I'm not, I assume someone's going to say, you're done, it's time for someone else.
When you say your disposition, do you view yourself as a collaborative person and not terribly directive when it comes to this, or is that what works for the firm?
Yeah, I would view my role as more collaborative. I mean, there are times where a decision's got to be made and communicated, and we can do that. And there's times when difficult conversations have to happen, and I can do that. But I think the long-term success of the firm depends on us being somewhat flexible in how we deal with these issues. I mean, I think everybody we've got at our firm is a great person, has the potential to be a great lawyer. And if they're struggling with something, I want to know, and I want to help figure out a way to get them through it, and less kind of directive in terms of behavior and other things. So,
did you do anything formal to prepare for a leadership role? Did the firm send you to a special camp somewhere where you learned different skills?
No, but I did go to summer camp.
There you go.
Maybe that was it.
I've
had the opportunity, since I've been back in Cincinnati, to be involved in a number of nonprofits and on a number of boards, and on a number of those rising to leadership position in those boards. So I think that gave me good training. I think teaching gave me good training, and it's not that dissimilar trying to run a 7th grade classroom as managing a bunch of lawyers. And so I've thought a lot about leadership over the years, and I think if you want to be part of the group that makes decisions, right, which is really, you want to be in the room, so to speak, then you got to figure out a way to be able to do that. And I think there's certain skills that you've got to be good at. Like you've got to be self-reflective. You've got to have a good understanding of where your strengths are, where your weaknesses are, where your blind spots are, where you need help, where you can excel. You've got to have a balanced perspective. You've got to have humility. You can't sit there and not recognize the fact that you wouldn't be here if you didn't have help along the way from lots of different people, and some of it may just be luck. But
how much have you seen your leadership style develop over time? I mean, for me, what scares me when I became a manager of a law department was not how little I knew. It's much more how much I thought I knew compared to how little
Yeah.
I knew.
Yeah. It's it's definitely evolved. Like I can remember the first board leadership role I took, and you know, I was like, oh, if that guy could do it, okay, I guess I can follow him. And then you start to figure it out, and so I've thought a lot about leadership. I also feel like you have to know who you are and who your core values are, and that's true for an organization too, because that I can't. One of the leadership roles I got to uh, serve in was as the chair of the board of Cincinnati Country Day, and that, I mean, it's a school, so it's got all kinds of issues that come up. It was COVID fell during that time, and so you just had a lot of stuff to deal with. And if you've got people around you that you trust are going to try to make the right decision for the organization and not for themselves, and you know what the values of the organization are, you 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 can navigate anything if you've got those two things. And if you've got people that are only about themselves and their egos and their concerns and not the organization or the constituents' concerns or clients, then you've got problems. And so we've been fortunate I've been fortunate to work with great people on the boards I've been on and great leadership teams within those organizations, and fortunate to be around great people and to learn from at Katz Teller. So
Let me ask one more question, and I'll let you take over again. Um, were you worried when you took on the role that you were going to have to give up too much of your practice?
um
And how's it worked out?
it's definitely, I mean, I estimate I probably spend somewhere between 200 to 300 hours a year on that role. So it's definitely um, meant less billable time. Um, but it felt like the right thing to do. And I enjoy it. So that's been okay. And I've got a great team of people around me in terms of estate planning and tax related work. So it's been good to help develop them as well.
You talked about the like kind of um division between being a leader that gives the best example and instead being a leader that like tries to understand. So my question is, how do you go around doing that while maintaining the firm wide consistency? Because I get that it's important to give an individual a certain amount of flexibility and freedom to express whatever he or she thinks is the best way to approach a problem, but on the other hand, you still need to.
Yeah, it's a challenge. I'm still
Yeah.
fighting that. I am by no means a perfect example of what a lawyer should be all the time. There's lots of mistakes and lots of places you struggle, but I think you strive to do as well as you can do. You own where you're uh, inefficient or struggle, and you try to improve. I think this may not be quite an answer to the question. I feel like where my thinking has evolved is when I started, I felt like there were 3 or 4 models of what a great attorney is. And and I could see them, right? These 4 lawyers, and they were all a little bit different, and they were great in their ways, but there were a lot of similarities in what they did and in their practices. And what I've realized is everybody's practice is different, and everybody's skill sets are a little bit different, and there's not just one way or 4 ways to be a great lawyer. There's a lot of different ways, and we got to give people the room to figure that stuff out. But we do have to do a better job of laying out expectations of what we expect from each other. I mean, we've had conversations over the last year and a half about what does it mean to be a shareholder, right? Does it mean you have to bill X hours? Does it mean, you know, does it mean you have to care and you have to own the problems and your clients' problems? What is it? What does it mean in terms of how we treat each other? How quickly are you supposed to respond? If I email you with a question, is it okay if you don't respond to me in a week or acknowledge that you got it? Or do I need a response within 24 hours and, hey, I got this. Here's my time and you need it sooner. And so just all those interactions and how do we define that? And if you've got, I think in the past, if you've got a bunch of people that are working, 12 hours a day, they're anxious enough that they're going to respond to everything before they shut it down for the day. And we also have seen that can be challenging for people too in terms of burnout, right? The way, I remember when I used to visit my dad at the office, 40 years ago, and he'd come back from lunch and there were a bunch of pink kind of Post-its that had phone messages on it. And so you would get that stack and you'd go through them versus now, you've got people texting you, you've got emails coming in, you've got phone calls coming in. They're all coming in. They're coming on your phone line, your mobile. And how do you keep up with all of this ability for people to connect with you and figuring out how to deal with that in a way that lets people live a reasonable lifestyle and be away from the problems at work at some point during the day is challenging, right?
Oh, and
how do you
thanks
balance
to the telecom industry that I worked in for so many years, we put up towers everywhere so you can never get away.
Yeah, that's right. And how do you set your phone down and is that okay? Right. What expectation do you set and then can you do that?
Yeah, I mean, my children, if you ask them what their favorite vacation we ever took was, I don't know if they still would talk about it now that they're both in their 30s, but for a long time they were like Glacier National Park. And you'd think, well, because it's beautiful. Well, that was most of it, but it was also, there was no cell service when they were 8 or 9 at Glacier. And they actually had me and my wife all week with nothing else to do but hang with them, and that's just, it's hard to find these days.
Yeah. But how do you create that and how do you help people create that? And is that okay? Right. So figure out that balance between you gotta be responsive or they're gonna go find your clients are gonna go find another lawyer. But how do you set expectations in a way that allows people to enjoy what they do?
I just have one more question and then we'll let you jump in if you've got one more. Going back to law school, if you could go back and talk to yourself as a 2L or 3L, what were you worried about that you wish you weren't now? And what do you wish you had thought about more, done more? Or is it all just seamlessly perfect?
I tend not to look back, but I think that it wasn't until the end of law school, well, in my third year, that we made the decision that we were going to come back to Cincinnati. And that the more I look back on that decision, the better it just feels like. It was a great place to raise kids. It was a great place to be able to get involved in things. I think if, the most likely place I would have ended up was DC, and working at a big firm in DC would have been a different lifestyle. Probably would have been some ability to go in and out of private practice and government. People did that all the time, but it just would have been, there might have been one organization that you got immersed in and maybe got involved in at a leadership level, but both my wife and I have had opportunities to be involved in 3 or 4 organizations at a very significant levels and be involved in the strategy and be in the room. So that decision of being in a place where that was possible was great. And it wouldn't have happened in the same way. I don't think I was thinking about that at all when I was in law school. But I did have this sense of coming back to Cincinnati and being in a town that felt like a small town was a worthwhile thing. And all my friends from college and from law school on the East Coast were, it was hard for them to think about a life not on one of the coasts. So
One last question for the future, maybe first year associates. You mentioned that you expect and you do provide a lot of discussions in the firm's culture and how to approach different topics and different issues. So is transparency something that you expect from first year associates in terms of like bring your contribute to whatever you think on how to solve this particular issue. And if it is, then like how do you balance it with the rest, and what are the other main features that you expect from first year associates?
Yeah. So I think transparency is two ways, right? The firm should be as transparent as possible with associates and sharing data. And I think we've done a good job of that. We want people to understand what the business is like, how we work, what we do. And I think including them in those conversations to the extent we can is great, and sharing the data is great. But we also expect them to be somewhat transparent with us, and we've got to make that easy for them to do. But if they're struggling, if they're not comfortable, if they've got issues, if they don't feel like they're being welcomed into the firm, or they're not getting the kind of work they want to get, we want to know, and we want to be able to try to make it a place that they want to be long term. So
Great. I think that's a super place to end. Unless you've anything else?
no,
All right. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
thank you.